Alrighty, so today we're going to be talking about kind of wrapping up spread as well as finding a 5-number summary and then constructing and interpreting a box plot. Now, in the past, we discussed our 3 measures of center and our 3 measures of spread. So looking at our 3 measures of center, we have mean, median, and mode. Mean we use when we do not have outliers. Median we use when we have outliers because we can rule them out. And mode we don't really use very often, if not at all. So when we're looking at spread is going to be our 3 different pieces. We have range, we have standard deviation that goes with mean, and then we also have our IQR. Now our IQR is actually going to go hand in hand with the median because we're going to be looking at percentiles. So we're going to be looking at middle of the road, middle of the values, and we're going to find median a lot today. So first of all, let's figure out what IQR actually stands for. So IQR stands for interquartile range, and it uses percentiles to describe the spread of the distribution. Now remember, we're going to recall, percentiles measure the percent of the observations, so the percent of the data that fall below a value. And we talked about with the cumulative relative frequency chart in the previous lesson that when we found medians in the middle of our data set, well, if median's in the middle of the data set, that means that half of the data is going to be above my median and half of the data is going to be below the median, meaning that we're going to be right at the 50th percentile when we're looking at this. Now, when we're looking at some other percentiles, we have our 0th percentile, so 0 percentile. What that is that we have the lowest value in the data set because we have 0% of our data is below this number. Well, that's just going to be our minimum value, whatever our lowest value is. And then we're going to look at 25% of the data. So we're going to look at another percentile, the 25th percentile. The 25th percentile is called the first quartile, or we just call it Q1. Think of like this is the first quarter of the data, or since we're looking at the first quarter of the data, think of a quarter of $1. It's 25 cents. So it's a 25th percentile. 25% of the data is going to fall below this value. This is 1/4 of the data, or 1/4 of $1, 25 cents, however you want to think about it. 50th percentile, we just discussed, is the middle value in the data set. So looking at the middle, it's actually going to be the median. Notice how median and IQR are going hand in hand right now in percentiles. And then we have the 75th percentile. So think of it like this is a 3rd quarter of our data. So think we're looking at 3/4 of my data. So we have 75 cents, or 75% of the data is going to fall below this value. And we call this the 3rd quartile, or Q3. Now you might be thinking where Q2 is. Well, Q2 is at the halfway mark, which is just the median. So we're not going to have Q1, Q2, Q3. We're going to have our Q1, which is the first quarter of our data. We're going to have our median, which is the middle, not Q2. Technically, it is Q2. It's the 2nd quarter of the data, or half of the data. Then we got our 3rd quarter of our data, so 3rd quartile, or 75% of the data. And then we have 100th percentile, meaning that this is the highest value in the data set because 100% of the data falls below that number. So we're going to have our maximum. These 5 numbers and these 5 quartiles make up the 5-number summary. Super straightforward. So we have our 5-number summary. So when I ask you to find the 5-number summary, it's just going to be your minimum, your first quartile, median, 3rd quartile, and maximum. And you just put Q1 and Q3 for short. So we're going to have basically splitting up and identifying the quartiles. We're going to go through and we're going to split it up into 4 quarters of our data. So when we're going through this, we're going to put them in order So remember, in order to find median, a lot of you guys forgot to do this on your worksheet in practice the other day. When we're trying to find the median, we have to make sure that our observations are in order from least to greatest. So we order them from least to greatest, and we're going to find the median because that's going to be our halfway point. So I want to find my median first, and then I'm going to split this up and find of my lower half, what is half of that value, or what's the median of that half. So that's going to split it up into a quarter. And then you're going to look at the upper part, so the upper side of your data, and let's just say that we have this whole side. We want to cut that in half because that's our other quarter of our data. So we're trying to chop this up and identify our quartiles and splitting it up into 4 quarters. So we'll find the middle value of our left side and a middle value of our right side, and that's how we're going to get our 5-number summary. The minimum and maximum, pretty straightforward, especially when you label them from least to greatest. So let's try an example. Looking at an example here, we have data from our previous statistics class, and they were asked how many hours of sleep they got before the first day of school. So minimum, maximum, pretty straightforward. Looking at the min, looking at the max. I know my minimum is 2, maximum is 8.5. That requires little to no effort. You just need to know what the minimum and maximum values are and how to look and find those values. Okay, looking at your median Q1 and Q3. So your median is the middle of the value. So remember, we're going to tick one off from the high low, and we're just going to keep going till we get to the middle. So keep going till we get to the middle, keep going till we get to the middle. Okay, I have an even amount of data points on this side as I do on this side. Now, since I have 2 values of my median, remember we take the average or the mean, really my value here is going to be in the middle between these 2, and that is going to be on median, which is 7. Now, because we're not having a value as our median, we're going to include the value to the left and to the right into my lower half and my upper half, and I'll kind of highlight these for you. So this is going to be my lower half of my data. So we split it into halves, and this is going to be the upper half of my data. So now what we're going to do is find the middle of the lower half and the middle of the upper half to get my quarter 1 and quarter 3. So we're going to find the median, again, of just everything in the yellow. So we're going to look at these 2 values. Bum, 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 bum. So my middle value is this 6 right here. That is my quartile 1. That means that 25% of my data is below that value, and then another 25% is right in between here. We're just splitting this up into 4 different sections. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing for the upper half to get Q3. So bum, 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 bum. So this 8 right here is going to be our third quartile. So we have a quarter of the data here, 50% here, 75% here, and then 100% obviously all the way down here. And we split it up into our 4 quartiles or 4 quarters of our data. Now, if I had something like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, if I'm looking at my median here, my median value is 5. That would be my median. So because I have a value in my data set that is my median, I am not going to include that because I want the values below that number, and I want 50% of the values above that number. So I got 4 here, 4 here. So if you get a value that's on my median, we're not going to be including it. So then we would find my quarter 1, which is 2.5 here, which is Q1. I'll have my third quartile, which is going to be halfway between 7 and 6, which is 6.5, and that would be my Q3. So just another rendition of how we can find our quarter 1, so our first quartile, third quartile, and our median. Always find your median first. Now, your IQR is your interquartile range. Think about what is your interquartiles. Well, your interquartiles are going to be your Q1 and Q3. And you're just going to look for your range of the data set. Well, my range in my data set is going to be from Q3 minus Q1. Remember, we take the maximum minus the minimum, high value minus the low value. So just like range, it's going to be a single value. It's not going to be an interval. We'll just say that this is the range of my data. It ranges, or my interquartile range is this. So what is the IQR of the number of hours of sleep that the group of stats students got? So looking at this, well, we want to find our IQR. To find our IQR, we're going to take our third quartile minus our first quartile, because it's the interquartiles, inner quartiles. And we're going to have 8 minus 6, which is going to get me 2. So 2 hours is our interquartile range. Taking a look at putting this all together and how to display it as a box plot. So the 5-number summary can actually also use to create another graph. It's called a box plot, or a box and whisker plot, something that you've maybe talked about before. So when we're looking at constructing a box plot, there's a few things that we need to remember. So first of all, you need to make sure you have a title, and then also label your scale. Make sure it's in good context of the problem. Make sure it's not like weird scales, and make sure we're going up by the same value every time. So just remember that we cannot just mark the values of the 5-number summary. Make sure you have a consistent scale, just like I said. When you're placing your points at each key value of your 5-number summary, your box is going to be drawn from your Q1 to your Q3. The vertical line down the middle is going to tell you, now it's not necessarily going to be the middle box, like the middle of the box, but this is going to be rather where your median is going to be at. So we're going to have our box, and then we're going to have these little whiskers coming out, and they're like lines coming out from my box. And these reach out and extend to the minimum and the maximum value. So it extends out to the minimum and the maximum value. So last notes, when we were talking about center and spread, we use teacher ages from lowest to highest. And we're going to find that 5-number summary that we did before, and we're going to construct the box and whisker plot. So remember, your 5-number summary, we have our minimum, we have our Q1, we have our median, we have our Q3, and then we also have our maximum. Minimum, maximum, pretty straightforward. Find those first. So you have your minimum, which is 24. Maximum is 51. Now, before we can find our Q1 and Q3, we need to find our median. And we actually found the median beforehand. Remember, our median was right in here. We had our 31 to 32. We had to find halfway in between, which was our 31.5. Now, because we're not using these values, this is going to be down here in the lower half. This will be in the upper half. So we'll actually look at those values as well. So taking a look, we're going to look at our quarter 1. So remember, we divided this in half. So now we need to make sure that we go through and we find those values. So we're going to look at the middle between 29 and 29, which when we look between 29 and 29, really all our lower quartile or Q1 is going to be 29. Do the same thing, mark each one off as we go. Looking here, here, here. Right in between here is our quarter 3 or third quartile, and we have our 39. 39 plus 39 divided by 2, it gives me 39. It's halfway in between those two numbers. It's still going to give me 39. All right, constructing the box and whisker plot in and of itself. So we have our x-axis. Hopefully yours is straighter than mine because that wasn't very straight. I'm going to put a teacher's ages on here. Teacher ages. And let's go ahead and let's go up by, let's say we have to go 24 is the lowest. So you can go up by 2s if you want. I'm going to go up by 5s, and I'll just start at 20, because then I can go up to 55, and then I'll just have 51 on there. You can go up by whatever you want. It doesn't matter as long as they're even increments. That's all that matters to me. So let's see, we got 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 50, 55. And if you want to write little tick marks in there, you can. I'm just going to look at estimations. So what I'm going to draw first is my box. So my box is going to start at my quarter 1. So 29. So if you want to put 25, 26, 27, 29. Oops, 29 should be right there. So let's see, 29 is going to be right about here. This way you don't do this in pen. Okay, and then we're going to have the end of my box is going to be at my quarter 3, so 39, so right about here. And then we're going to have my median that's going to go right in the middle. So my median is 31.5, so 31.5 maybe right about here. Now notice this isn't in the middle of my box, and that's okay. That's not where it's supposed to be. That's my median. That just tells me where my median is at. Okay, and now we're going to have these whiskers. So I know that my lowest value is going to be about 21, so right about here. Or sorry, 24. Whoops. 24, not 21. 51 is what we're going to have for my medians, so, or my maximum. So we're going to have my dot up here. And what we're going to do is just connect these with little whiskers. And there's my box and whisker plot. So let's go ahead and try this again. But we're also going to find out what's nice is that you can use a numerical way to find outliers when you're looking at your box and whisker plots. But in order to do that, you kind of need to know your IQRs, you need to know your interquartile range and everything else. So really, we're going to do an outlier test. So when we're taking a look at our 5-number summary and the IQR, the numerical way of determining this, I just like to call it my outlier test, or sometimes it's called 1.5 times IQR test. So I'm just going to call this the outlier test. And here are your steps. Now, once again, like we said, we have to do the 5-number summary again because you need to find your IQR. In order to find your outliers, we're going to have our Q1 minus 1.5 times our IQR. Any data that lies outside that number is an outlier. This is what we called our lower bound, our lower boundary. So we're going to have our lower boundary, and then we're also going to have our upper boundary. So we're going to use our first quartile, and we're going to subtract off 1.5 times our IQR, so we're in our quartile range. And then we're going to take our Q3, and we are going to add 1.5 times that. So we're just going to go a little bit above our quarter 3 and a little bit below our quarter 3. Any numbers that lie outside of those values, so any numbers in our data set that lie outside those values, are called outliers. So looking at our 5-number summary from our sleep example, so our lower value there, our minimum, was 2. Remember, we had our Q1, which was 6. Our median, which was right in between those 7s there. Our Q3 was 8. Our maximum was 8.5. So I'm just writing those down again. So now we're going to figure out, is there an outlier within our data set, and we're going to show our work. So first thing that we need to make sure we calculate is our IQR. So looking at our IQR, we're going to take the, so I'm just going to write down the actual formula here. So to find the IQR, we're going to take our Q3 minus Q1. So I'm going to take 8 minus 6, because we already did that. So 8 minus 6, and that's going to get me 2. So we have 2 hours. is our interquartile range. So now what we're going to do is compute our Q1 minus 1.5 times IQR. So that's going to be our lower boundary. So we're going to look at our lower boundary first. So looking at our lower boundary, we're going to take our Q1 and we're going to subtract 1.5 times our IQR. So I'm going to take 6 minus 1.5 times our IQR of 2. Now, order of operations, make sure you multiply first before you're subtracting. Or if you use our calculators here, I'm going to type in 6 minus 1.5 times 2, and it's going to get me 3. I typed that right into my calculator because my calculator do order of operations for me, so I don't need to worry about it. Alrighty. So now we're going to find our upper boundary. So for our upper boundary, we're going to take our quarter 3 and add 1.5 times our IQR. So we're going to take our upper boundary, our Q3, which is 8, and we're going to add 1.5 times 2. So we're going to take 8 plus 1.5 times 2 in my calculator, and I'm going to get 11. Any data, I'm just going to add this in here, any data that falls outside of the 3 to 11 is going to be an outlier, okay? So any data outside 3 to 11 is going to be considered an outlier. So looking at our data set, do we have any numbers that fall outside 3 to 11? Yes, our minimum value of 2. So because 2 hours, so we can say 2 hours falls outside of our falls below our lower boundary of 3. So we say 2 hours falls below our lower boundary of 3. Therefore, 2 is an outlier in our data set. Now, because we have outliers, and when we have outliers in our data set, we don't just throw them out because they're still a part of our data set. And we want to make sure that we depict that this is still a part of our data set. So we call this a modified box plot. And it helps us create a box plot where we can look at it and obviously identify our outliers. And so we make like different symbols for them. So for example, since we have an outlier in our example up here, we're going to have a star or a dot. I like to put a star instead because it's asterisk. It looks different than the other whiskers. And instead of the whiskers extending to the outliers, we're just going to extend it to the next observations that is within the acceptable distance or acceptable range of our numbers. So like if I had another one here, if I had another 2, I would have 2 asterisks. Or if I had like 2.5 here, I would then have another asterisk on there saying that, hey, this is where we have 2 outliers instead of just 1. Or if I had 12 hours up here, that's outside, so we'd have another asterisk on the outside. So looking at our modified box plot here, and we're just going to create another box plot. So we have, as a title, we could say hours of sleep students get. Or I guess students got before school starts. And we're going to have an x-axis. And here, an appropriate Scale would probably be just ones. So starting at 2 and going up to 9. So we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9. All right. So we have our minimum at 2, but that is our outlier. So our outlier is actually going to be put as an asterisk instead. So we're going to put a little star or asterisk just so it's different. And that way we can visibly see that there is an outlier here. All right. And then we're going to have our Q1. So let's go ahead and do those first. So we have our Q1 at 6. So we have our start of our box is going to be at 6. We have the median at 7. So the middle of my box is going to be at 7. And then my Q3 is going to be at 8. I'm just going to make my box here. So there's my box, and now I need to make my whiskers. Now, because I don't have any outliers over here, I'm just going to make sure that I have 8.5 as my maximum value. My minimum value is an outlier, so we already have that on there. So what we're going to do is the next value within the acceptable range is anything within 3. So 4.5 is actually going to be our actual whisker that it extends to. So 4.5 is going to be right about here. This box plot looks a lot better than my last one. So here is my box and whisker plot. That is a modified box plot. Modified just has your outliers that are on there and identified. So it's great that we can actually make a box plots, but let's start interpreting them and kind of figuring out what piece is what. How can I figure out my range? How can I figure out other things and kind of look at what our values are for these box plots here and compare some different distributions. So interpreting the data in a box plot. So we have our data A, B, C, and D. And we have some mystery variable here. And we're going to take a look at which group has the largest range. So let's find the range for each one. So I'm going to find my range for A, find my range for B, find my range for C, and D. Remember, all we're doing is taking the maximum minus my minimum. So with these values, our maximum and minimums are actually looking at just lines instead of dots. And sometimes that happens, and that's totally fine. It just makes it a little easier to look at when you have a split box plot here, or a side-by-side box plot. So I'm going to take my maximum, which is about 30 for A, minus my minimum, which is 10. So I'm going to take 30 minus 10, and I'm going to get 20. So that's my range of my first data set. I'm going to take my second data set, which is probably about 32, and we'll subtract this a little less than 8. So 7. So 32 minus 7, that's going to give me 25. Okay, bigger range. Looking at our C, we have 30 minus 13. So we have 30 minus 13, which is going to give me a range of 17. And D, we have a range of 20 minus 8, which is going to give me 12. So the group with the largest range is going to be my group B. And you can kind of see that using the box plot. The box plot itself is a lot more stretched out, and it ranges and spreads out a lot more when we're looking at it. So looking at the largest IQR, so the interquartile range, you can find each IQR. So we're going to find the IQR for A, find the IQR for B, C, and D. So looking at my IQR for A, remember it's your quartile 3 minus quartile 1. So third quartile minus the first. So Q3 minus Q1. So remember, this is my Q3, and my Q1 makes up for the outside box plots. So let's see here. We got 25 minus 15. So we have 25 minus 15, and that's going to get me 10. Looking at B, let's see, B's 20 minus 9, which is going to get me 11. C, we look at 23 minus 18, tiny little guy, which is 5. And I'm going to have 16 D should be 16 minus 10. And we get 6. So looking at all of these differences in the largest interquartile range, you can also look at how spread out my IQRs are, my boxes in the middle are. You can see that B is obviously going to be larger. You might want to calculate it because B and A, they're pretty much the same stretch. So I would say looking at it, we're up one more, which has the largest IQR, so group B. All right, so now we're going to sit here and compare the median and the quartiles between A and B. So we're going to take a look at the quartiles between A and B. So remember, this is our median. Our median of A, so the 20, is equal to the quartile 3 of group B. So it's something that we could say. So group A's median, so I want you to write this down for 3, because I'm not going to write it down for you. You say the group A's median is equal to group B's third quartile of 20. Or you say group A's median is equal to the 20, which is the same as third quartile of B. You can also say, looking at the other quartiles for A, the first quartile is at 15 for A and is larger than the median and the quartile 1 of group B. So we can have our median or our quartile 1. So group A's first quartile of 15 is larger than group B's first quartile and median. So we kind of compared those quartiles here. And obviously we have the third quartile that's up here is A is larger than all the quartiles for B. So taking a look at comparing the median and quartiles between C and D. So we're going to look at C and D now. So we can say that looking at C's median, let's start there. So we started median last time. So we're looking at C's median, which is this guy right here. Remember, this is your median. What is it equal to in D's? Yeah, it's equal to the maximum in group D. So we can say that group C's median of 20 is equal to group D's maximum value. So group C, this is number 4. I'm not going to write this down for you, so you should be listening and you should be writing this down. So looking at the median of C is equal to the maximum value of 20 in D. And you could say then also that group C's first quartile is larger than group D's first median and Q3. So this first quartile here in quarter 1 of 18 is going to be larger than the first quartile in group D, or the first quartile, median, and group D's. And third quartile in group D. Something of the sort's looking at all those quartiles. Just got to know what each piece means. So make sure that you grab the practice from me if you haven't done so yet. And then go ahead and work on that. And then whenever you're done, just make sure you turn it in to me.